What happens when recording your racist teacher almost gets you arrested? Our school banned all student recording devices after a teacher got fired for a viral video. Zero tolerance meant automatic expulsion if caught with anything that could record. But when my history teacher started targeting students with racist rants and physical threats, that rule became a weapon to protect the worst kind of abuse. My name's Jordan Walsh, and I'm about to tell you how a school policy designed to protect teachers nearly got me charged as a felon for documenting attempted murder. Mr. Vincent Caldwell had been teaching at Roosevelt High for 15 years when I walked into his AP history class junior year. Tall, gray-haired, with the kind of presence that made freshmen scatter in hallways. Parents loved him because he got results. His students scored higher on AP exams than any other teacher in the district. What they didn't know was that Caldwell was a master manipulator who'd perfected the art of psychological torture while staying just clean enough to avoid official complaints. He knew exactly how to break students down without leaving evidence, and our school's recording ban gave him perfect cover. The policy had started the previous spring when Ms. Rivera got caught on video having a complete breakdown during standardized testing. Some kid posted her screaming about worthless students and administrative incompetence to social media, and within hours, it had 500,000 views and local news crews in our parking lot. Principal Matthews' solution was simple and absolute: complete ban on recording devices during school hours. Phones had to stay in lockers with cases that blocked camera access. Smartwatches got confiscated at the door. Even pen cameras meant immediate suspension and potential expulsion for undermining educational integrity and violating privacy expectations. Caldwell celebrated the new rule louder than anyone else on staff. During our first class, he made a big theatrical show of explaining how certain troublemaking elements had been trying to sabotage dedicated teachers. But now we could focus on learning instead of creating drama for social media attention. "This classroom is a sacred space of education," he announced, walking between our desks, with his hands clasped behind his back like some kind of dictator surveying his territory. "What happens here, stays here. No recording devices, no outside interference, just pure academic discourse between teacher and student in the traditional manner." The way he smiled when he said it made my stomach turn with unease, but I didn't understand why until he started showing his true colors just a few weeks into the semester. His carefully constructed mask of professionalism would slip when he thought nobody was paying close enough attention to his methods. His first target was Michael Thompson, a quiet black kid who sat in the front row and took meticulous notes on everything Caldwell said during lectures. Michael had transferred from a private school across town and was obviously smart and well-prepared, which seemed to irritate Caldwell from the very first day of class. It started subtle and almost unnoticeable to casual observers. Caldwell would call on Michael for impossible questions that had no clear answers, then act disappointed and slightly surprised when he couldn't respond perfectly with encyclopedic knowledge. "I thought private school students were supposed to be prepared for rigorous academic challenges," he'd say with fake concern dripping from his voice. When Michael tried to participate in class discussions or offer his own analysis during lessons, Caldwell would cut him off mid-sentence or dismiss his contributions with barely concealed annoyance. "That's not quite right, Michael. Let's hear from someone who's actually done the assigned reading properly." Then he'd call on Sarah Wilson, who'd give nearly identical answers that Caldwell would praise as excellent analysis and critical thinking. The pattern was subtle enough that individual incidents seemed like normal teacher criticism or academic standards, but over several weeks of careful observation, it built into a systematic campaign designed to destroy Michael's confidence and make him question his own intelligence and academic abilities in front of his peers. I started paying closer attention after Michael came to lunch one day, looking completely defeated and emotionally drained. "I don't understand what's happening," he told our table while picking at his food. "I study harder than anyone else in that class, but Caldwell acts like everything I say is wrong or stupid. My parents are asking why my participation grade is so low when I raise my hand constantly." That's when I realized what Caldwell was really doing behind his professional facade. He wasn't just a tough teacher with high academic standards. He was deliberately targeting the few Black and Latino students in our honors classes, using subtle psychological techniques to push them out of advanced placement courses where they belonged. The real ugliness came out during our unit on the civil rights movement in American history. Caldwell spent 3 weeks presenting a revisionist version of historical events that painted civil rights leaders as troublemakers who unnecessarily disrupted social harmony and suggested that segregation had some legitimate benefits for maintaining community stability and order. When Michael raised his hand to challenge Caldwell's characterization of Martin Luther King Jr. as divisive and problematic for American society, the temperature in the room immediately dropped to freezing. Caldwell's friendly teacher mask slipped completely for just a moment, and I saw pure racial hatred flash across his face before he regained control. "Mr. Thompson, I understand this topic might be emotionally challenging for someone with your particular background and family history," Caldwell said slowly, emphasizing certain words in a way that made his meaning crystal clear. "But in this classroom, we deal with objective historical facts, not personal feelings or political propaganda. If you can't handle academic rigor without getting emotionally upset, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a lower-level course." The racial undertone was unmistakable to anyone paying attention, but Caldwell had phrased his response just carefully enough that any formal complaint would sound like overreaction or misinterpretation. Michael's face burned with humiliation, while the rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure how to respond to what we'd just witnessed. That afternoon, Michael went directly to Principal Matthews to file a formal complaint about racial bias and discriminatory treatment in Caldwell's classroom. Matthews listened politely, took detailed notes, then explained that personality conflicts sometimes happen between teachers and students, and maybe Michael just needed to try harder to meet Caldwell's rigorous academic standards. Mr. Caldwell has been here 15 years with an exemplary record and numerous teaching awards, Matthews said dismissively. Perhaps you're misinterpreting constructive academic criticism as something more sinister than intended. These honors courses are challenging for everyone, and not all students are prepared for AP-level work. Michael's parents requested an emergency meeting with school administration, but it went absolutely nowhere productive. Caldwell sat there looking concerned and reasonable, while explaining that Michael seemed unprepared for AP-level coursework and might benefit from additional study strategies or tutoring. He had gradebook entries and assignment scores to back up his claims about participation quality and homework completion. Without recordings or witnesses willing to speak up publicly, it became Michael's word against a respected teacher's documented evidence and 15 years of positive evaluations. The school's official response was to offer Michael a transfer to regular history, which would have completely derailed his plans for AP credit and competitive college applications. That's when I made the decision to break the recording rule, regardless of potential consequences. Someone had to document what was really happening in that classroom, and official channels had already proven completely useless for protecting students from systematic discrimination and psychological abuse. I started with my phone, keeping it hidden in my hoodie pocket with the camera lens barely poking out through a small hole I'd cut in the fabric. The audio quality was terrible, and the video mostly showed the inside of my sweatshirt, but it captured Caldwell's voice clearly enough to hear his tone and specific word choices during his attacks. Within a week of careful recording, I had accumulated hours of damning material. Caldwell calling Michael boy instead of his name during discussions. Dismissing Latino student contributions with comments about how that's not how we do things in America. Praising white students for identical answers he'd previously criticized when they came from students of color. But the smoking gun came during a heated discussion about modern immigration policy and border security. Carlos Mendoza, whose family had immigrated from Guatemala when he was young, tried to share his perspective on why people leave their home countries and seek opportunities elsewhere. Carlos, I'm going to stop you right there before this gets out of hand, Caldwell interrupted with obvious irritation. Your family's personal situation is certainly interesting from a human interest perspective, but we're here to study policy and governance, not listen to sob stories. Maybe save the personal anecdotes for English class, where feelings matter more than facts and objective analysis. The cruelty was absolutely breathtaking, but Caldwell's tone remained conversational and professionally appropriate for any administrator who might review the incident later. To an outsider listening to a recording, it might have sounded like reasonable classroom management rather than deliberate humiliation of a student discussing his lived experience with immigration. That night, I transferred all my recordings to my laptop and started editing together a compilation of Caldwell's worst moments and most obvious discriminatory behavior. The pattern was undeniable when you heard multiple incidents back to back, but I knew I needed more substantial evidence before going public with accusations this serious. The next phase involved getting better quality recordings that would be harder to dismiss or explain away. I researched spy cameras online and found a pen with a built-in recorder that looked identical to regular ballpoint pens, but contained sophisticated recording equipment. Expensive for a high school student, but worth it for clear audio and video. The pen camera worked perfectly and captured everything I needed. Within 2 weeks, I had crystal-clear footage of Caldwell's psychological warfare against minority students. Him standing over Michael's desk, speaking quietly enough that only nearby students could hear his words. Maybe you should consider whether you're really college material, Michael. Some people just aren't cut out for academic success at this level. Him telling Carlos that his essay about his grandfather's immigration experience was inappropriate for a history class and suggesting he write about actual historical figures instead of random family members whose stories aren't historically significant. Then praising Sarah's essay about her grandmother's World War II experiences as exactly the kind of personal historical connection that makes the past come alive. The double standard was impossible to ignore when you saw it compiled together systematically, but the individual incidents still seemed minor enough that reporting them through official channels might not work. I needed something bigger, something so blatant that even the administration couldn't dismiss or rationalize it away. That opportunity came in November, during our unit on World War II and the Holocaust in European history. Caldwell had been building toward something for weeks, making subtle comments about historical accuracy and questioning established narratives that set off alarm bells for anyone paying close attention to his rhetoric. David Goldman, one of only 3 Jewish students in our entire AP history class, had written his research paper on his great-grandfather's experience surviving concentration camps during the Nazi genocide. It was powerful, well-researched, and deeply personal, connecting family history to broader historical themes and primary source documentation. When David finished reading his introduction aloud to the class, Caldwell's response was swift, vicious, and completely unprofessional by any reasonable standard. The mask came off completely, revealing the true depth of his hatred and ideological extremism. That's quite a dramatic story, David. Very emotional and compelling from a narrative perspective, but I have to wonder about the accuracy of some of these specific details and claims. You know, there's been a lot of scholarly debate about the actual numbers and conditions in these camps. Sometimes family stories get embellished over time through retelling. The classroom went completely silent as 28 students processed what their teacher had just said. David's face went white, then red, as he realized his AP history teacher was essentially engaging in Holocaust denial while maintaining plausible deniability through academic language. "Are you saying my great-grandfather was lying about being in Auschwitz?" David asked, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "He has the numbers tattooed on his arm. American soldiers liberated him from the camp. There are military records and documentation. I'm saying that historical accuracy requires multiple sources and careful analysis of all available evidence," Caldwell replied smoothly, his voice taking on a professorial tone. "Family stories are interesting and emotionally powerful, but they're not always historically reliable or complete. The Holocaust is a sensitive topic that requires very careful handling to avoid spreading misinformation or exaggeration. My pen camera captured every word as Caldwell essentially told a Jewish student that his family's Holocaust experience might be fabricated or exaggerated. It was Holocaust denial wrapped in academic language and delivered to a teenager whose great-grandfather had actual concentration camp tattoos and liberation documentation. David stood up so fast, his chair fell over backward with a loud crash. "My great-grandfather has numbers tattooed on his arm from Auschwitz. He was liberated by the American Army in April 1945. There are photographs and military records. Are you seriously saying that's not historically accurate?" "I'm saying that in an academic setting, we need to be very careful about accepting any historical claims without rigorous verification from multiple independent sources," Caldwell responded, his voice getting colder and more hostile. Emotional attachment to family stories can cloud objective analysis and critical thinking skills. That's when David completely lost control, screaming about his family's trauma and the documentation they had, while Caldwell stood there looking satisfied with himself for provoking such a reaction. Other students started arguing and raising their voices until Caldwell finally called for order with obvious pleasure at the chaos he'd created. "This is exactly why emotional topics require academic discipline and professional detachment," he announced to the disrupted classroom. "When feelings override facts, education becomes impossible. Mr. Goldman, please collect yourself or step outside until you can participate appropriately in our discussion." David stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled in their frames. The rest of us sat there completely stunned while Caldwell calmly resumed his lesson about maintaining objectivity when studying controversial historical events, as if nothing unusual had happened. After class, I found David in the bathroom, crying and punching the wall with his fists. He basically called my great-grandfather a liar in front of everyone. He sobbed between punches. "How is that legal? How can teachers say stuff like that without consequences?" I wanted desperately to tell him about the recordings and assure him that I had evidence, but I couldn't risk exposure before I had enough material to completely destroy Caldwell's career. Instead, I just listened while David talked about his family's history and how much courage it had taken to share something so personal, only to have it dismissed as potential propaganda. That afternoon, David went to Principal Matthews with both his parents, demanding immediate action against Caldwell's Holocaust denial and anti-Semitic behavior. Matthews listened carefully, took detailed notes, then explained that academic discussions sometimes involve challenging different perspectives and interpretations of historical events. Mr. Caldwell wasn't denying the Holocaust occurred, Matthews said with bureaucratic precision. He was encouraging critical thinking and source evaluation, which are important academic skills for AP-level coursework. Perhaps David misunderstood the pedagogical intent behind the questioning methodology. David's parents were absolutely furious, but without recordings or other concrete evidence, it became another he-said-she-said situation where the administration automatically sided with their veteran teacher's version of events. The system was designed to protect teachers, not students. That's when I realized I had to go public with my evidence, regardless of the personal consequences or potential criminal charges. Students were being psychologically abused and systematically discriminated against, while administrators covered it up through bureaucratic language and plausible deniability. I spent the entire weekend editing together a 20-minute video showing Caldwell's pattern of racial and ethnic targeting, culminating in the Holocaust denial incident with David. The evidence was undeniable when compiled systematically, months of psychological abuse designed to push minority students out of honors classes. Monday morning, I uploaded the video simultaneously to YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, then sent direct links to local news stations, the ACLU, the Anti-Defamation League, and every parent email address I could find on the school website directory. The response was immediate and explosive beyond anything I had anticipated. Within hours, The video had thousands of views and hundreds of angry shares from parents and community members. People were calling the school demanding answers and accountability. Local news crews were setting up in our parking lot again. By second period, I was being called to Principal Matthews' office over the intercom system. My stomach dropped as I realized they'd figured out it was me, probably by analyzing the camera angles and seating positions shown in the footage combined with voice analysis. Matthews was waiting with 2 security guards and the school resource officer when I arrived. On his desk was a laptop showing my video, paused on a frame that clearly showed Caldwell's face and the classroom layout during the Holocaust denial incident. "Mr. Walsh, I'm going to ask you directly and I expect complete honesty. Did you create this video using recordings made in violation of our clearly established school policy?" Matthews asked, his face red with anger and embarrassment at the situation. I could have lied and tried to deny everything, but the evidence was pretty obvious to anyone paying attention. My voice could be heard on some of the audio tracks, and the camera angles perfectly matched my seat position in Caldwell's classroom for the entire semester. "Yes," I admitted, without hesitation, but only because students were being systematically abused and discriminated against, and nobody in administration would listen to formal complaints or take action when we followed proper channels. Matthew's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "You've violated one of our most serious policies by secretly recording teachers and students without their knowledge or consent. This is potentially criminal behavior under state wiretapping laws that opens the school to massive liability exposure. What about Caldwell telling a Jewish student that his family's Holocaust experience might be fake or exaggerated?" I shot back angrily. "Is Holocaust denial not criminal behavior? Is systematic racial discrimination not illegal under federal civil rights laws? That's a matter of interpretation regarding academic discussion and teaching methodology," Matthews replied dismissively. "What you've done is clearly illegal recording and distribution without consent from any of the parties involved. You're suspended immediately pending formal expulsion proceedings." The security guards escorted me to my locker to collect my personal belongings, while other students watched from their classroom doors. Some gave me supportive looks and thumbs up, but others seemed genuinely scared to be associated with someone who'd broken such a major rule. At home, my parents were already fielding calls from reporters wanting to interview me about the recordings and Caldwell's behavior. My mother was proud that I'd exposed a racist teacher, but my father was worried about potential legal consequences and criminal charges. "Schools take this recording stuff seriously because of privacy laws," he said while pacing around our living room. "They could press criminal charges for violating wiretapping statutes. You might have done the right thing morally, but you could still go to jail for it." That afternoon, a lawyer called our house unexpectedly. Sarah Kim from the ACLU had seen the viral video and wanted to represent me pro bono in any legal proceedings. She explained that exposing discrimination in public schools was exactly the kind of case their organization took on regularly. "The recordings clearly show a pattern of discriminatory behavior that violates federal civil rights laws," she explained over the phone. "The school's recording policy doesn't override students' constitutional rights to document illegal discrimination and abuse in educational settings." Wednesday morning brought a complete media circus to our quiet neighborhood. News vans lined our street as reporters knocked on our door, asking for exclusive interviews about the racist teacher scandal. The video had gone viral overnight, with over 500,000 views and coverage on major national news networks. The school district was in full damage control mode, issuing carefully worded statements saying they took all allegations seriously and were conducting a thorough investigation. But they also emphasized that unauthorized recordings violated established policy and potentially criminal statutes. Meanwhile, other students started coming forward with their own stories about Caldwell's discriminatory behavior over the years. A girl from his American government class described how he'd told her that women weren't naturally suited for political leadership roles. A Latino student from previous years talked about being repeatedly asked if his family was in the country legally. The pattern became undeniably clear when multiple victims spoke up. Caldwell had been systematically targeting minority students for years, pushing them out of advanced courses and undermining their academic confidence through psychological manipulation. The recording ban had given him perfect cover to operate without accountability. Friday brought news that Caldwell had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation by the district and state education department. The teachers' union issued a statement supporting due process while carefully avoiding any defense of his actual recorded behavior. But the district was also moving forward aggressively with my expulsion hearing, scheduled for the following week. They maintained that recording violations were serious criminal matters, regardless of what the footage revealed about teacher misconduct. Sarah Kim filed an emergency injunction to stop the expulsion proceedings, arguing that I'd been acting as a whistleblower, exposing civil rights violations in a public institution. The case quickly drew support from multiple advocacy organizations and former students sharing their own experiences with discriminatory teachers. The hearing was moved to the district office and opened to the public due to media attention and community interest. The room was packed with parents, current students, civil rights activists, and reporters. I'd never seen anything like it for a simple student disciplinary case. Principal Matthews presented the district's case first, arguing that recording policies existed to protect privacy and prevent harassment of teachers doing their jobs. He emphasized that unauthorized recordings violated state wiretapping laws and created a hostile work environment for educators. Sarah Kim countered that students have a fundamental right to document discrimination in public schools, especially when official complaint channels have repeatedly failed. She played portions of my recordings that clearly showed Caldwell's systematic discriminatory behavior over months. This student did what civil rights activists have always done throughout American history, she argued passionately. When official systems fail to address injustice and protect vulnerable people, ordinary citizens must document and expose the truth. Mr. Walsh's recordings revealed systematic discrimination that violated multiple federal laws. The school board members looked visibly uncomfortable as they heard Caldwell's voice telling David that Holocaust survivor testimony might be unreliable or fabricated. Even knowing the recordings violated established policy, it was impossible to ignore what they revealed about systematic abuse of students. After 4 hours of testimony from students, parents, civil rights experts, and legal scholars, the board voted 5-2 to overturn my expulsion and dismiss all disciplinary charges. They issued a statement saying that while recording policies remained important, exposing discrimination served a compelling public interest. More importantly for future students, they announced a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices throughout the entire district, with independent oversight and mandatory bias training for all teaching staff and administrators. Caldwell never returned to teaching anywhere. The district quietly negotiated his resignation in exchange for not pursuing criminal civil rights charges. He moved to another state, but my viral video followed him everywhere. Every school district that Googled his name found footage of him denying Holocaust experiences and targeting minority students. The recording policy got completely revised within months. Students could now document suspected discrimination or safety issues, provided they reported it to authorities within 24 hours. It wasn't perfect protection, but it closed the loophole that had protected abusive teachers for years. Michael, David, and Carlos all stayed in honors courses and thrived under new teachers who actually supported their academic success. Michael got into Stanford with early admission. David won a national essay contest about confronting Holocaust denial. Carlos became student body president and valedictorian. The whole experience taught me that sometimes rules exist primarily to protect systems, rather than the people those systems are supposed to serve. When institutions systematically fail to address discrimination, ordinary citizens have to step up and document the truth, regardless of policies designed to maintain silence. Schools want to control narratives and protect their institutional image, but students deserve teachers who see their humanity and potential rather than targets for systematic degradation based on race or ethnicity. Recording devices aren't the real problem here. Racist teachers and complicit administrators are. 2 years later, I still regularly get messages from students in other districts who've used similar documentation techniques to expose discriminatory teachers and abusive behavior. The tools exist to hold educators accountable, but it takes courage to use them when administrators prioritize policy compliance over basic justice. That video may have almost gotten me expelled and potentially sent to jail, but it also saved countless future students from years of psychological abuse disguised as rigorous academic standards. Sometimes breaking unjust rules is the most moral choice available.